What made you laugh the hardest in your entire life? Back in the mid-90s, when I was a 15-something teenager, my cousins and I had the house to ourselves, so one decides to put a porno in the VCR. I warned him that my dad was coming home soon and that he might want to think twice, but he didn't heed my warning. We kept watching the front door, so we'd be ready to eject the tape and not get caught. Lo and behold, my dad just happened to come through the side door in the garage that day and was suddenly standing there behind us. Myself and one of my cousins bolted out of the room when we noticed him. The third cousin wasn't so lucky. He noticed us running off and, with my dad right behind him, shouted after us, "Hey, where you guys going? Don't ya want to jerk your dicks?" At that point I lost all feelings in my legs as I fell to the floor in laughter. I could still see my cousin through the hallway as he was slowly turning around and noticing my dad behind him, at which point he jumped back around, frantically trying to figure out how to turn off the VCR, but to no avail. It was one of those really old VCRs where stop and eject weren't on the front of the unit. He finally just dropped to his knees and tried hugging the TV to block the picture, crying that he was sorry. I turned so red from laughter that it felt like I was running a fever. I had difficulty breathing for the rest of the day and my ribs felt like they'd been shattered. My poor cousin though, he not only got caught watching porn in hilarious fashion, but he also got teased for years about whether or not he was serious about his proposal to jerk our dicks in the same room together. Edit, my first gold and silver. Thank you, kind strangers. Also my highest rated comment. I'm so glad I brought everyone a good laugh this day, especially those thinking my dad was the one who made the jerking our dicks comment, which would have been extra hilarious and extremely out of character for him. I'm sorry I can't keep up with the responses, but your laughs have put a big smile on my face today. I'm off to bed now. To sleep. Yeah, sleep dusts off VCR. I was in college. I shared a dorm with my buddy Matt. My girlfriend, my first real love, had done something faked up and decided we weren't together. I was utterly heartbroken. I cried for days. I have a history of serious depression, suicidal tendencies, and it just sent me into a spiral. I remember laying in my bed with my arm over my face so that Matt wouldn't know tears were streaming down my face. He mentioned that an old friend of his from Round Rock, Texas would be coming to stay in our dorm for the weekend. I didn't give a shit, and I didn't even really remember until the guy showed up. He came in the door, Matt introduced him as Chet, and I stayed in bed with my arm over my face. Matt and Chet were catching up, talking about old times. When Chet asked what was my problem, Matt explained the breakup and the depression. Chet proceeded to walk over to my bed and pull the covers off me. He pulled my arm off of my face and said, "Not while I'm here, not on my watch." I couldn't stop crying. He dragged me out of bed and sat me down next to Matt. We just talked. He started telling jokes. I wish to God I could remember what he said. Within 30 minutes I had, for the first time in my life, fallen out of my chair laughing. I laughed so hard I cried. He was that funny. The entire weekend he had me laughing. I loved him for it. It was like meeting a brother or an angel or something. When he left I hugged him so many times and told him I loved him. We kept in touch a little bit over Facebook, just once in a while. One day I checked his Facebook at random. All of the posts said RIP, or I miss you so much. I couldn't figure out what was going on. It literally made no sense. I texted his aunt and said, "What the fuck is this stuff?" She said, "I'm so sorry, baby. Chet has hung himself." His ashes were spread in Garner State Park, outside of Round Rock. It was his favorite place. I was at my mother's house when I got the message. She hadn't seen me cry since I was 10 years old. I tried so hard to swallow it down. I broke down. It has been about 6 years, and I still think of him and break down. But I will never forget the day he got me out of bed and said, "Not on my watch." I may ask Matt, my old dorm buddy, just what it was Chet said to me to make me fall out of that chair. I will never forget Chester Hadel. I love you, Chet. Edit. Well, this got buried. At least I got it off my chest. Edit 2. I haven't checked my account in some time and had no idea this blew up or was even seen. Thank you for the kind words. I will try to think of a better update soon. Final edit. I asked Matt what it was that Chet said to make me laugh. He said it was nothing, and it was everything. He couldn't open his mouth without being that goddamn funny. Obituary. Maybe not the hardest I've laughed, but this one translates well to text and was still faking hilarious at the time. This was actually just about a month ago, mid-September. My roommates and I all smoke, them a bit more than me, and two of them were out on the porch with some other people. One of our friends walks in, saying that apparently my roommates were in a heated argument, but it turns out they were making a bet with each other. My friend, let's say Jay, bets my other friend, let's say Cole, $50, that Cole can't go an entire week without smoking or drinking, and Cole takes the bet. It goes Tuesday to Tuesday, and all is going well, barring a slightly agitated Cole. Jay eventually lowers the bet to $25 and takes the drinking clause out of it, so Cole can get faked up over the weekend. Monday night comes, and a total of like 6 of us are in our apartment, bowls and bongs packed, ready for the clock to strike midnight. When it does, the kitchen becomes foggier than Smog's hole, and people are jetting jiggly and celebrating Cole's great feat. I mention how this feels like a sort of Passover holiday, and we all joke questioning if this is how religions get started. We joke about Cole being our savior, and agree that we should celebrate this week every year. Well, Jay takes out his phone to put in a reminder, and the moment he sees his calendar, he starts to do that dry wee sort of startup laugh, until he is full blown crying out of laughter. We all look at him to see what's up, and he just looks up and yells, "It starts on 9/11. We were in absolute tears laughing, realizing that this truly was how religions were started. And I'll be damned if I don't celebrate that week of sobriety every year, god damn it. I was getting Mexican with my best friend and her new boyfriend. She was intensely into him, and was still in the fluttery infatuation stage, so she was putting on her best face, dressing cute, saying all the right things, etc. Her boyfriend excuses himself to the restroom. Soon after she sneezes, hard and loud, right after she takes a massive bite of a bean burrito. Instead of continuing on, she keeps her head down almost to her chest, and is making a weird breathing noise. Alarmed, I asked her if she was okay, or if she was choking. She lifts up her head, and I can see she is not choking. Rather, the sheer force of her sneeze caused her to inhale refried beans from her mouth into her nose, which is now flowing from her nostrils onto the table. To top it off, her eyes are now huge with horror and confusion as she glances to the direction where her beau slipped off to, and I can tell she is praying he isn't on his way back. It takes me a few moments to understand what I'm seeing, but when I finally do, I burst out laughing. I'm no longer in charge of my body, I'm a slave to it now. After I start laughing, she tries to say, "Please don't tell him," but you see, she never swallowed the rest of the beans. So as she says this, partially chewed bean burrito starts slipping out of her mouth. The whole visual of my beautiful darling friend with refried beans pouring out of her nose and mouth with her eyes helpless and massive with horror, while the love of her life could be back at any minute. The pleading fear in her voice. It was also absurd that I was laughing so hard I thought I would actually die. She was able to successfully clean herself up before her boyfriend returned, but I was not able to get myself together. I was laughing so hard tears were streaming down my cheeks. By this time, she had started laughing too, and we both got caught in a laugh cycle where we were just feeding off each other. Her poor boyfriend asked what was so funny, but we could barely speak at that point. It took us about 10 minutes to get a hold of ourselves, and even at that point we couldn't make eye contact without laughing again. For the record, I never told him. They're married now, so I might have to one day. TLDR, best friend leaks refried beans from several orifices, while the man of her dreams is just around the corner. I was on a 13-hour road trip and there were 4 of us in Insuv. We were coming back from a rugby tournament and everyone, except the driver, was crushing road beers. Now in order to maximize our travel time we went ahead and got 2 of those wider-mouthed bottles of Gatorade. We would drink the Gatorade and use the empties to pee into and pour out the window as we drove. I thought this was hilarious, and it went well for a majority of the trip. That is until my friend beside me in the backseat requested one of the pee bottles. Important to note here that the other pee bottle was currently occupied. So he starts using one of the pee bottles, and he gets halfway, and it doesn't sound like he's slowing down, so he starts requesting the use of the second pee bottle. However, as I mentioned, it was currently being used by another member of our party. He begins to get frantic as the bottle begins to get closer to the top. The other pee bottle is being emptied out the window as fast as the laws of physics will allow. All the while my friend is growing more and more frantic at the prospect of peeing all over himself. The driver is constantly looking in the rear view to see if his backseat of his SUV is going to be decimated by urine. The passenger in the front seat is holding the other pee bottle out the window and yelling Anita on its usability, and here I'm in the back seat watching all of this go down, not knowing whether I'll be covered in urine or witness the greatest high stakes relay event in my lifetime. My friend peeing in the bottle, realizing he's about to run out of room, says he's going to try and pinch his flow off to try and give my other friend who is emptying the bottle precious time. Just as he's run out of room in his bottle, my friend in the passenger seat exclaims that his is empty. The empty bottle is passed back in a flurry of hands and excitement as I grab it to pass to my friend who had just pinched off his flow. But he doesn't reach for it straight away. Instead he looks at me with an empty pee bottle in my hand ready to give it to him, and just kind of half shrugs and says that I don't need it anymore. I pissed my pants. He then gestures down, and my eyes follow to a huge wet stain covering his underpants, completely soaked through the whole front, as if he went for a quick swim. Because of all the excitement and adrenaline and bizarreness of everything, we all just broke down laughing, and I laughed so hard my contacts fell out of my eyes. Still have never laughed so hard before, and I'm sorry if this didn't do it any justice. In my student house last year we ran out of toilet paper and were all way too lazy to go to the shop and buy some, so we just decided to use kitchen roll, which resulted in the toilet becoming very blocked. After deciding to just leave the blocked toilet to its own devices and see what happens, me and my best friend go for a night out, get stupid drunk and return home. My bedroom was next to the bathroom, so I could hear almost everything that went on in there, so very clearly heard my very hungover friend running into the bathroom, realizing the toilet was blocked, and kind of yelling in a crazed panicked way. He knocks on my door looking a little bit in pain, and asks how he should poop if the toilet is blocked. I reply with maybe in the garden, maybe into a bag. He takes me up on the bag idea and goes to get a carrier bag from the kitchen. He then returns to my room to ask how he should do it. I suggest squatting over it and folding the opening of the bag over itself to create a more structurally sound poop hole. He pauses for a second, looks at me, and then realizes that I've already done that exact thing earlier in the morning. Disgust, disappointment, and hilarity ensue. Friend then goes into the bathroom and locks the door. Obviously, he may as well not have, cause I can hear everything through the wall anyway. Every subtle moan and soft thud of poop on floor will forever be in my mind. When he's finished he walks out of the bathroom with a small blue carrier bag full of poop. We are both crying at this point, either tears of laughter or repulsion. We spend a good amount of time discussing how best to dispose of his poop bag. Mine was stealthily chucked in a neighbor's bin. After a while of him faking with me by almost swaying his poop bag into my face and us both running around the house, he decides to throw it away. He opens the front door, revealing the poop bag to the world and the postman, who is literally right outside our door. I still crack the fuck up about this on a regular basis. I have a picture of friend proudly holding his poop bag, but I have vowed to never let it see the wider world. Very late to the party here, but here goes. I live with my boyfriend, and around a year ago we'd invited my 6-year-old brother to stay the night and have an epic sleepover. This was the first time we'd ever had him overnight, and it was awesome. Anyway, my mother neglected to tell me that my brother often will get up in the middle of the night and climb into bed with her. No crying or nightmares, he just enjoys a midnight cuddle. So, my brother is sleeping in our spare room. My boyfriend and I are now fast asleep in our own room. It must be around 2 AM. My boyfriend is lying on his side, facing the open bedroom door that looks directly into the landing. My brother's spare room had these pink/red fairy lights on, and as I'd left his door open, it had illuminated the whole of the upstairs in a low red glow. So, we're all fast asleep. I then suddenly am jolted awake by horrendously, ear-piercingly, high-pitched screams of utter terror. I'd say they lasted around 6 seconds. I jump up, trembling to find my boyfriend wailing like Marv off Home Alone when the spider gets put on his face. I'm screaming, "What's wrong? What's happening?" I have never heard this noise come from this man in all our 5 years together. Ever. He suddenly stops and says, "Oh, hey Marta Pop's brother, calm as can be." I see my little brother standing in the hallway with the most shit-eating grin. So, he'd woken up in the middle of the night to come into our room and saw my boyfriend first. He began whispering my boyfriend's name whilst standing outside our door with an ominous, deathly, almost hellish glow lighting him. So in my boyfriend's days, he saw the silhouette of a small demon, no distinguishable facial features, which is why he began to scream those death note screams of hysteria and terror. Once I pieced everything together, coupled with my brother's utter delight at the situation, I lost it. I absolutely started to wail with laughter, ears streaming. Then my brother started laughing, and once the color returned to his face, my partner started to laugh. I pulled my baby brother into the bed, and the fallen adrenaline rush made my partner fall straight back to sleep. But my brother and I lay there suppressing tears of laughter for a good half hour. Each time one of us would get it together and get quiet, the other would start all over again. Easily one of the funniest faking experiences of my life. I wish his screams were recorded. A few years back, I was in a small bubble tea shop with my girlfriend and a friend hanging out. While we were there was another couple who was looked to be on a study date or just hanging out. There's no one else there other than us and the people working. I'm the only one sitting to face them. As the evening passes, the other couple try their hand at those electronic dart games. It's basically just a regular dartboard, but with special darts that stick into an electronic rubber board that tracks your score. The girl has no idea how to play darts, so her date shows her by throwing a few as an example. After a bit, she gets the courage to try it out. She gets ready, winds up, and releases. Wham! She throws the dart right at the bottom of the hollow plastic machine with the hardest throw she could muster. She made it look like she was real angry at that machine for hurting her family. That noise was so loud, everyone there turned to look, but didn't want to make a big deal, because we could all see that it was her first time. I laugh a little bit, and my girlfriend takes notice. Not to be discouraged, her date asks her to try again, but maybe to aim a little higher this time. Again, she winds up and releases. Wham! Again, she misses her target, only this time, she hit the sign at the very top of the machine. I'm sure she felt a little embarrassed and stopped. At the time, I felt bad for trying to stifle the biggest laugh I've ever had, because it was a small store and mostly quiet, but goddamn did I nearly piss myself laughing. And of course, all of this happens in the 2 minutes that my friend goes to the washroom. Not only did I have to control one of the biggest laughs in my life, I had to explain what happened to my friend about 2 minutes after I could speak again without crying of laughter. TLDR, girl hits 2 beautifully executed bullseyes. I know I'm late, but this story still makes me laugh so hard I can hardly tell it. One night I was spending the night in my parents' trailer. I was visiting from college and my dog lived with them at the time, so he generally slept with me while I was there. The layout of the trailer is simple. On one side is a living room with 2 recliners, a couch, and a TV. Crammed next to that area is a small round table with 3 chairs and a minuscule kitchen. Then there's a step and a ridiculously tiny bathroom, and then the bedroom. That night I had walked the dog and we both piled onto the couch to sleep. Within a few hours, I woke up to my dad's voice and a raunchy, disgusting scent. "Did you fart? Or did you sheet?" he asked, and I realized my dog was missing. I heard the bed creak, and my dad get out of bed, and almost immediately, in the most deadpan and broken tone, he goes, "Oh, my god." At this point I was still lying on the couch in the dark, so my dad assumed I was asleep, and told me to get up, coughing and between more exclamations of "oh my god." Half asleep, I asked what was wrong. As it turned out, my dog had gotten an upset stomach and spewed liquid sheet all over the kitchen linoleum. He's part lab, boxer, and pit bull, so he is not a small boy, and apparently his bowels were endless. It smelled like absolute death, like a corpse covered in vomit, was sitting in the sun for hours on end. The floor was totally covered. As soon as my dad said, "Jesus Christ, your dog shit all over the goddamn kitchen," I lost my goddamn mind. I skipped laughing and went straight to sobbing. My whole body was shaking so hard that I was actually moving the whole trailer and woke my mother up in the bedroom. She heard me crying and asked what was wrong. I tried to tell her, but couldn't choke it out between all of the sobs and tears. All I could get out was Deku, which is my dog's name, and shit. She was actually more angry that I woke her up than anything else, and my dad ended up cleaning the kitchen while I tried to regain control of my lungs. My dad seemed to find it much less funny. My girlfriend, now fiancé, a couple of years ago. This is one of those situations where you really had to be there, but fuck it, I have a keyboard in front of me and 5 minutes to type, so you're getting it. We had a party in the summer. I've never really considered myself a party person, and definitely not a host, but it turned out I had a really good time and got nicely hammered. I'm not much of a drinker, generally, but I had a skinful. Her son, 22, was mixing me vodka and coke, the bastard, and as the party was winding down, about 2 AM, those of still around just sat on the deck to shoot the sheet. Eventually we went to bed. I woke up the next day feeling like shit, entirely deserved, but eventually I make it downstairs to where the half a dozen or so people who stayed over are having coffee. They all look at me weirdly. Odd, but nothing that new, tbh. Anyway, after 5 minutes, GF looks at me and says, "You said you remember everything you say when you're drunk, right?" Me, "Yes, why?" "Huh, so do you remember what you were talking about last night?" Me, Long story short, apparently the conversation had turned to pornography, and not only was I amazed at one lady present saying she has some porn on DVD, not the fact that a woman would watch porn, but that it was a DVD FFS, I decided to tell everybody present how much I love porn, and then went into detail talking about the various themes and subtypes I look at most. I still don't remember any of this. And it's not, even though I do love porn any more than any other dude who spent a large part of his early 30s single. That's not the funny bit though. It did become kind of a running gag with us for the next few months, but nothing spectacular, and I figured I was kind of due for some ribbing given that I still don't remember it. That October, we are out to dinner with a couple of the friends who happened to have been at the party, and hence know the porn story, and the conversation gets around to the Olympics. I go on this, probably boring, monologue about how much I love the Olympics, even the sillier sports like ice skating, because I always appreciate when people can do things well that I know I'll never be good at. This is when a lady of mine jumps in and says, "Is that why you love porn?" After a brief pause I and the others burst out laughing to the extent that I was close to tears. Usually I'm the funny one, quips, puns, etc. But her timing that night was so perfect that I still tell the story now, even though I was the butt, as it were. I've got two, and they're both sort of you had to be there moments. One. When I was about 17 or 18, two of my close friends would always say your bussy smells in a really weird accent, just whenever they felt like it. I never joined in, and they would try their hardest to get me to say it. This goes on for a couple months, and one night we are all playing the game of things, which is a game that involves people writing things down in response to a card, and then someone reading all the things. Both of them wrote your bussy smells when it was my turn to read, and when I read the second one we all lost it. 2. Another game night, but this time it's Cards Against Humanity, and one of our friends is reading the cards off like you do, but my wife realizes he didn't read hers before picking their favorite. Wife, friend, you didn't read my card. Friend, yeah I did. I read them all. Wife, no you didn't. Let me see. When she goes through them, she sees her card which was just the word khaki. Wife, look. There it is. Why didn't you? Friend, do you know what that word is? We all realize he doesn't recognize the word, and when we call him out on it, he just says how weird word. And we all lose it, not only over him not recognizing the word khaki, but that he tried to play it off like that happens to everyone. Anytime I tell these stories I know they are not funny to hear secondhand, but I swear I'll never laugh harder than those 2 times. Thanks for making me think of them again. Here's a word of advice. Don't attend a car crash as part of a first date. I was 19 years old and recently single when I first tried my hand at online dating, and suffice to say, it didn't go well for me. Whether because of problems with my profile, my unrealistic standards, or just sheer bad luck, I seemed entirely unable to find anyone with whom I actually felt a connection. Finally, almost as an act of surrender, I agreed to meet for coffee with a young woman whose self-description had painted a picture of an interesting, but physically unattractive individual. We made plans to visit a cafe near the beach, and I set out with only barely flickering enthusiasm. To my surprise, the girl turned out to be much more appealing in person than she'd appeared on the internet. I even told her as much, and she confessed to having intentionally offered images that downplayed her beauty. It was a rather pleasant turn of events, and since the young woman claimed to find me similarly entice, the 2 of us sat down near the coffee shop's front window for what I was certain would be a mutually enjoyable first encounter. We spent a few minutes debating what to order and who would pay for the first round, then turned our attentions to one another in full. Just as the conversation was getting started, though, we were interrupted by the loud screech, pop, and crunch of a fishtailing car plowing into a nearby tree. As is wont to happen in such circumstances, many of the other customers gathered around to gawk at the scene. Murmurs of speculation rippled through the small crowd as we all watched the car's driver climb out and survey the damage, followed by gasps of shock and alarm as people noticed that her head was bleeding. One of the cafe's employees went to call 911, and my date asked if we should try to help the woman. I was about to respond with my agreement, but the words never came out, largely because they were replaced by uproarious laughter. Please understand, I wasn't making light of the car crash. In fact, at the exact moment that I'd been encouraged to assist, I'd caught sight of something that my brain decided was too funny to ignore. From behind the wreckage, there came an enormous, almost spherical, man riding on a motorized bicycle. He looked to be about 50, had an expression of intense concentration on his face, and was moving so slowly that it really seemed like he should have toppled over. Each of the man's limbs were frozen in place, statue-like, as the dull whine of the vehicle's motor struggled to inch him forward. I don't know why I found that so amusing, but I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Tears of mirth clouded my vision, and no matter how hard I tried to restrain myself, I just couldn't stymie my amused outburst. Needless to say, it didn't make the best impression on the girl across the table from me, and I could feel the disapproving stares of the other patrons from all around. I did finally manage to explain what had caused me to break down like I had, but I'm not convinced that the young woman believed me. We didn't have a second date, but to be honest, I still chuckle to myself when I picture the man on his moped. TLDR, my first date with a girl was a literal car wreck, but it also gave me my funniest memory. Me and my little brother and older sister were with my parents visiting my grandparents. It had just snowed. We wanted to get my mischievous grandpa back for nailing us with hard, frozen snowballs the previous snowy visit the year before. We devised a plan to get him outside and vulnerable. We lied and said we heard a water leak outside by the front part of the house. Thanks Dad for the tip. It worked like a charm. I remember vividly exclaiming, "I hear water leaking outside," and my grandpa's gruff voice barking out where from another room as he scrambled to get his shoes on. I got him outside in the front yard and surprisingly he bent over to better check his water hose spigot in the bushes. My sister and brother came from the side of the house with tons of snowballs in their hands. We got a few good hits in before he could realize the ambush unfolding before him. As he quickly retreated up the front porch steps, he snarled, "You little snots." My sister got a snowball right on his butt and I will forever have ingrained in my memory the day grandpa got hit with a snowball in the ass and looked like a goddamn bunny rabbit. My granny locked him out on purpose so we could throw more snowballs at him, but we were too busy gasping for air as we laughed so hard we peed our pants. My sister and I sounded like we were dying as we rolled on the ground in our hysterics. My little brother continued like the good soldier he was, throwing as best as he could as grandpa fumbled for his front door keys. What was the most impressive was that despite the situation grandpa was in being locked out and fumbling for his keys to get inside, he still had enough sense to stomp the snow off his feet before entering the house. I can't be sure, but I think I was around 11 years old. It was around that time that I used to spend a lot of time at my grandparents' house so that I would have someone watching over me while my parents were at work. One of those days my grandpa's, who was a public notary secretary, came over for a visit and brought her kid, around the same age as me, along. So naturally we were left to figure out which way is best to spend our time. My grandparents lived in an old-fashioned house in the city nonetheless and had a chicken pen. It was a season for onions, since there were some onions fresh from the garden lying around waiting to be washed and used later. There were many of them, so I figured I could borrow some. I picked one up and threw it over the hen house. My mate did the same and picked an onion and threw it over the pen as well. At some point we agreed that this was a show of dexterity and mastery. So we did this maybe one more time. Granted, we would have picked up the onions that ended up over the pen later. It was then that I figured I must throw the furthest and highest of us too. So I picked an onion and swung my arm a few times, a strategy employed by many cartoon characters, and threw it with all my might, aiming high and without doubt. Now at this point the visual and auditory aspects of the result were very homogeneous and were unexpected to see and hear. The onion wasn't flying over. On its path it hit a part of the metal roofing of the hen house/hay storage, ensuring a representative thunk, then fell inside the chicken's water pot, ensuring a representative pluck and chicken scatter. I turned around and saw my friend holding his waist and falling to the ground. I followed his reaction. It was a magnificently built up attempt that failed both our expectations apparently. Secondly, birds probably have a sense of collective awareness that they employ mid-flight. If a bird sees danger and can act to avoid it, but the others can't see it, they will assume the threat anyway and follow the response of that first bird. Maybe the thunk of the metal alerted some to spread or duck for cover, and maybe they saw us fall to the ground shot by that obvious threat as well. That is a great explanation for why a pigeon flew straight into the closed windows of a kiosk that was a few feet away from us. That did it. I changed color and couldn't see anything anymore because my eyes were closed, and the plop of the onion and that pigeon's dive were the last thing I saw. Grandma came to check on us and asked what had happened. As I was explaining, I was regaining my lost composure. I can feel the blood rush and all around just joyous feeling to this day. That has to be one of my most hilarious experiences. When I was back in university, I went on a charity hitchhike across Europe with a friend. Near the end of our trip, heading for Marrakesh, we decided to stop in Gibraltar and go up to the top of the rock. As we pay admission and head up, the woman at the counter warns us that the monkeys are pretty fearless and will grab anything that looks like it may contain food. She specifically pointed out my friend's black plastic bag, to which my friend brushed off and said that it would be okay. Cut to 10 minutes later, we are on top of the rock and the monkeys are hanging around, eyeing my friend suspiciously. A big one approaches from behind him, and, just as I turn around, it grabs his black bag. My friend, grabbing the bag as tightly as he could, panic across his face, looks at the monkey, and says, "Give it back." Underestimating the monkey's strength, how often do you stand off against one? With one great yank, the monkey takes the bag from him, running with it to the wall on the edge of the cliff. Again, my friend stares it down and yells, "Give it back." The monkey, clearly amused, does a little dance with the bag and casually tossed it off the cliff, jumping after it. My friend looks back at me in horror. I'm already laughing hard, but not as much as when he tells me that he was keeping his passport, money, and diary all in that plastic bag. I feel bad for laughing, but honestly, funniest thing to ever happen to me. Who puts everything important in a plastic bag when traveling? Cut to 10 minutes later, he literally scaled a wall and managed to retrieve the torn up contents of the bag. Passport made it back pretty intact, but a record he had in the bag has a monkey bite shaped piece missing. Mid 2000s, I was 16 years old, and I was with two of my high school friends who were both my age. Like most 16-year-olds, we had just gotten our licenses, and so we spend most weekends just driving around. My cousin is driving his '95 Camry, I'm in the passenger seat, and my other friend was in the passenger side back seat, right behind me. This friend was that one guy that almost every friend group has. He was the Kenny, South Park, of the group. Broken home, pretty poor, had his first beer at 8, and spent most afternoons after elementary school watching MTV, and that one fuzzy bad signal porn station that came on TV. Beavis and but Head raised this guy. We are driving through random neighbors just chillin', when all of a sudden my buddy in the back says, "Dude, what's today?" "UHH, Thursday, why?" we replied. He then says, with the excitement of a child waking up to realize it's Christmas morning, "Tomorrow's trash day. Pull over." So my cousin pulls over in front of this house. It's like 11 at night. My buddy in the back rolls down his window, sticks his arm out, and grabs the handle of this trash can. Being that the next day was trash pickup day, all the cans, which are big and green, and have 2 wheels and a handle, are full of trash, and at the street, weighing prob 200 pounds easy. He then tells my cousin to start driving. He gets up to maybe 35 miles per hour in this neighborhood. My buddy tells him to get closer to the curb. My buddy waits for the perfect moment, and let's go. Capital RIP mailbox. This thing coasts perfectly for a few feet right into it, which soon becomes airborne. Trash erupts everywhere. The sound was sensational. Kinda like when someone gets rocked in the face by a dodgeball and you hear that perfect bruine. It was awesome. Shit is everywhere, and the mailbox flies like 10 feet. I've never laughed so hard in my life. I thought I was going to choke. I thought my cousin was going to wreck, because he too was so caught by surprise and laughing. We returned the next morning around 8:30, and actually saw the homie Arwanas outside, with all their neighbors standing there with that perfect what in the fuck face. My cousin and I felt kinda bad, especially since the one mailbox was totally destroyed, but man, that was hilarious. I still think about it when I'm having a bad day. I'm prone to laughing fits. It's often a forgettable joke that sets it off. My first memorable laughing fit was when I was 13, watching The Simpsons. Mr. Burns attempted to throw a smoke grenade. It landed about a foot in front of him and went off. It cuts away, and then cuts back to Smithers readying and throwing a new grenade whilst Mr. Burns is high on smoke fumes, singing, "I was walking through the gas one day." That had me down for about half an hour. Other jokes were during various films and TV shows. In Captain America, when Howard Stark is testing an infinity stone, and it blasts him across the room. He then exclaims, "Write that down." I embarrass my then girlfriend by laughing on and off for the next 15 minutes. People were getting angry as I desperately tried and failed to stop. In one of the Muppets films, the big bear guy places his eyes on an eye scanner designed to let him into a secure room. There's a bright flash as it scans his eyes. He then turns back to face the camera, and you see his eyes fall literally the first time ever. Even now this has me smiling. Ed is demonstrating reverse psychology to Eddie. He tells Ed to not eat that dirt. Ed immediately shrugs it off, laughing slightly to himself. After a second's pause, he glances back at the dirt, and can't help but eat it. My brothers and I reference this joke more often than you'd think, and various permutations of it have always made have a laughing fit. The latest version of this was when I was watching Interstellar with my youngest brother. We had just started the scene where the ship is approaching the wormhole to depart into a distant solar system. My brother then said, "Now Ed, don't you lick that wormhole," and then did the signature laugh that Ed replies with. That once again got me for about 20 minutes. My absolute worst experience with a laughing fit, and pretty bad experience in general, was when I was on a first date. We made plans to go see X-Men: Apocalypse. Upon arriving at the cinema, we discovered it had stopped playing the day previous, so we elected to go watch Finding Dory. At the point in the film where the octopus is slinking around the room, he descends into a sink, and then reaches up from the sink to flip a switch. The switch activates a garbage disposal, and he quickly lets out a surprised yelp before turning it back off. I spent about half an hour trying to stifle my laughter as my date stared in disbelief at how long I was laughing for. There was not a second date. Many years ago, when I was younger, a friend decided on a rather hot summer's day to have a BBQ for myself and a bunch of our friends in the back garden of his mum's house. For the majority of the time we were being annoyed by random wasps that had made a nest in a 6 feet tall hedge in his front garden. So after a few hours of heavy drinking, the men of the group decided the best course of action was to attack and destroy the nest with an aerosol cannon lighter. No one seemed to have the guts to get close to the wasps without fear of getting stung, so with the permission of the homie Arwana's son, I stepped up to the plate. Unbeknownst to me, the inside of the hedge was dry and barren wasteland of dead wood. One quick spray of flame and the whole faking thing lit up like a bonfire doused in petrol. In an absolute panic, we drunkenly attempted to try get some buckets of water to throw over it, however it proved useless. Someone thankfully had the sense to phone the fire brigade, and then all we could do was stand and watch this inferno, praying that it didn't cross to the house, which was only meters away. The crackling sound this thing gave off, coupled with our panicked shouting, ended up attracting quite a few of the neighbors, and at one point a guy who lived in the same row of houses looked out of his front door, darted back in, and then almost immediately shot back out with a kid under each arm and moved them to a safe distance. Fire brigade showed up not long after and put the fire out. No damage to anything except the hedge, and no one was injured, thankfully, although the fire chief tore us all a new one after he was informed of what had happened. Once everything had calmed down, we sat and laughed for about an hour straight, reminiscing, and even to this day I laugh thinking about it. My one brother is a straight, no nonsense type of guy who is about as stone-faced and stoic as one can get. At the time of this story, he's 24 and I'm 30. One night a few days before Christmas, I came home late, around 2 AM, to the family farm, and saw a light on out in the shop. Thinking someone forgot to turn it off, I head out to it, but as I approach, I hear power tools. So I step inside and see the back of my brother's head on the other side of a tractor. He was still awake working on Christmas gifts. I close the shop door and realize he probably didn't hear me coming due to the tools, because he didn't turn his head or anything. So I crouch and approach from the opposite side of the tractor, staying behind the wheels, and wait. As soon as he turns off the tool he's using, I call his name using the scratchiest, most guttural voice I can muster. No reaction. After a couple seconds I wonder if he heard me, but then he comes around the side of the tractor. He's got a hammer raised in one hand, his eyes are the size of dinner plates, and his expression is one of abject fear. He then sees me, and we stare at each other for a second before I burst out laughing, and he lowers hammer and flushes red. I'm laughing tears so hard that I fall into a chair because I can't stand. Brother is just standing there glaring at me with his jaw set to one side with the "okay, you got me" look, and this just makes me laugh even harder. Took a few minutes to get it all out of my system. A half dozen of us are hanging out at night with a spray bottle filled with rubbing alcohol and a lighter. We each take turns spraying one hand and setting it on fire with the other. It looks really cool. 10 or so seconds in, the fire either runs out of fuel or a quick wave of the hand puts out the fire before it burns. One guy is manning a video camera and simply refuses to participate. This in itself is already funny because he fancies himself the tough guy of the group. After watching the video footage and the rest of us going on about how cool it was, he decides to do it. He doesn't listen to any advice we give him and soaks his hand and most of his forearm in more alcohol than the rest of us used combined. He lights it up and his arms from the elbow down bursts into a flame. It does look amazing. He strikes a menacing pose, his eyes widen, and the adrenaline rush he gets is obvious. Remember the part earlier where I said we all did it for about 10 seconds? He's so pumped, he gets about 15 seconds and the pain hits him all at once. He starts hopping around and flailing his arms wildly while hooting and hollering. Instead of the fire going out instantly, flaming streams of alcohol just launch off his arms wildly into the night. A few seconds later he smothers the fire with this other rum, and the rest of us are doubled over or rolling on the floor with laughter. We just couldn't stop laughing about for the rest of the night. A day later he accidentally lost the footage. Aside from his pride and his now hairless arm, he was uninjured. When I was 13 there was this girl named Chloe who kept kicking me in the bum. She wasn't even particularly higher in social status to me really. We were both a few steps above nerdy yet 20 steps away from popular. But she was in a different group from me and had some newfound confidence when she started dating this hot, albeit retrospectively icky, 17-year-old. She had turned into one of the nastiest, dickheadish girls I've ever met. Seriously. She would just randomly come up and kick me in the bum. No provocation. Nothing. I got tougher as high school progressed, but at that point I was miles away from ever engaging in a physical fight. She wasn't even worth it to me honestly. Meanwhile around the same time I had befriended a bunch of the really nerdy boys in my music class. They made me laugh, and I liked that they didn't care what people thought. Anyway, one of these boys was a little guy named Leslie. He was only 18 months younger than us all, had been skipped ahead a grade so was a foot shorter than everyone. Even his friends made fun of him. He was just so little. He was also a crier. He just couldn't keep the tears in when someone was mean. He never stood up to anyone to the point where I was like, Leslie, you gotta stand up for yourself mate. Anyway, one day before class Chloe comes over and randomly kicks me in the bum. It hurt like hell, and I faking saw red. I turn around, and she's standing there laughing with her friend. Out of nowhere little Leslie came up from behind her like a little Energizer bunny and kicked her squarely up the ass. I'm 31 years old now. I will never in my lifetime laugh as much as I did in that moment. Little Leslie defended my honor. She never kicked me again by the way. So this guy, Bill, at work says ridiculous shit but this was awesome. At work, we were talking about potato guns. Steven was saying how back in Alaska he would build them all the time and have fights. Bill didn't get it, like how they worked. First he thought they were guns to shoot potatoes with, not shoot potatoes as ammunition. So Steve launches into a discussion about how to build one and finally he understands it shoots potatoes as projectiles. I'm already like, how does this FKN guy not get what a potato gun is? And then he is like, so the hairspray, what Steve used as ignition, reacts to the starch. All of my what? What do you mean, reacts to the starch? Steve tells Bill, no, there's no FKN reaction you idiot, it's internal combustion. The pressure pushes outward through the barrel, which launches your potato. I'm cry laughing that this guy doesn't get it, but hey you know what, we got there, together. Oh okay, but like, you couldn't do it with a banana right? I faking scream, literally scream laughing. Steve, you can't faking do it with a banana. Steve is dying. I'm literally on the floor. I honestly thought I was going to get a talking to because of it, but I couldn't help it. You can't do it with a banana. That will live with me forever. When I was in university in the early 2000s, there was a popular challenge going around, drinking a gallon of whole milk in 1 hour. One afternoon two guys decided to go head to head on this challenge. Suffice to say, each one had a different approach. The first guy, we'll call Sam. Sam was a pretty solid guy, football player, 5 minutes and 10 seconds 220 pounds of muscle. Sam's strategy was to drink as much milk as quickly as possible and then spread the rest out through the hour. The second guy, we'll call Ryan. Ryan was 5 feet 2 inches and about 220 pounds of not muscle. Ryan had a different approach. His plan was to eat peanut butter sandwiches for an hour and wash them down with the milk at a slow and steady pace, with the idea that the sandwiches would absorb the milk and allow him to drink more. The clock started ticking and Sam, true to plan, quickly down at the first pint of milk. Ryan began to sip on his first glass of milk while eating his PB sandwiches. By the time Ryan had finished his first glass of milk, about 10 minutes, Sam had consumed about 1/2 a gallon of milk. At this point, Sam began pacing around the room, hands on his hips taking deep breaths. Ryan continued to chip away and finished his second glass. At about the halfway point Sam was feeling good enough to try and chug another glass of milk, and so he did. After doing so, he wasn't feeling so great and immediately went over to a garbage can, hands on his knees breathing heavily. All the while Ryan was continuing to sip on his milk and eat his PB sandwiches. After a few minutes Sam began retch and eventually spew a mighty stream of milk into the garbage can. Ryan, ever the humanitarian, and concerned for his friend's well-being, got up and walked over towards Sam. As he approached, he caught a whiff of vomit from the garbage can and dry heaved. After a couple more heaves, the last heave was not dry, and he began to throw up in the garbage can, which in turn caused Sam to vomit wave after wave of milky vomit into the garbage can. At this point, those in the room were beside themselves with laughter. Every detail was hilarious, from the juxtaposition of their physiques to how their strategies and behaviors during the challenge were so true to who they were. The sound of the two of them puking their guts out, both having utterly failed the challenge with two hopeless strategies, was, by far, the funniest thing I have ever witnessed, and I've never laughed so hard in my life. Earlier this year, I was dicking around on YouTube at home as I was pre-gaming on a Friday night, before I was going to go out to the bars. I watch one of those stupid Vine compilations and find a clip in there of what turns out to be a line from Brandon Rogers' Angry Office. Realizing that has to be from something, I look that up and find his channel. I had seen him in passing on YouTube and that Try Me Beach meme, but never actually watched his stuff before. Long story short, it is the funniest shit I have ever seen, and I proceed to binge about 30 of his videos over the course of about 3 to 4 hours, while having about as many homemade screwdrivers in the process. Everything is getting funnier as I get drunker, and no, I didn't make it out that night. Zero regrets. Fast forward to the end of this, and I find Darlene is spiritual. I'm so far gone that the opening line makes me laugh for about 5 minutes straight, so I knew this was a good one. Every damn line makes me laugh to the point where I have to pause it because I'm laughing so hard I can't hear. Then we get to the character arc C, described as sex addict, likes pink. The delivery of her line, the pacing and timing in the video, and the fact that the joke is astoundingly funny, combined with my high as fuck back means that when I hear that joke, I instantly lost it and laughed uncontrollably for about 43 minutes straight and couldn't get composure of myself in that time either. Fell out of my chair and just laid on the floor and laughed like a freaking psych ward patient. Funniest thing I've ever heard, and it still gets me every time. Just over a decade ago I took a ballroom dance class at UAF. I had messed up my knee and that leg was still recovering. I also didn't have a car, was walking everywhere, and nowhere was less than an hour. Ever been to Fairbanks in winter? It's a bit chilly. I needed some laughs. Anyway, shortage of guys in the class, so this guy, Travis, that worked that time of day would join us, and we'd get partnered a few times a class. Travis was great, always making me laugh, putting me at easy TC to stand out. 1. He had a cold. In ballroom dance the girl, me, puts her hand on the guy's shoulder. He did a weird cross-knees combo. He's a considerate kind of guy, so to avoid doing it into my face he does it into his shoulder. The one with my hand. We both stop dead and look at his shoulder / my hand in disgust, then at each other, and bust out laughing. 2. I'm not very coordinated and my bum knee didn't help. We are trying to learn some cha-cha move. It did not go well. I don't remember what we were supposed to do, but I failed miserably. Left leg forward, I leaned forward, weight on L leg, tried to tap that foot, leaned back onto bum O leg that didn't bend, tried to tap L foot, weight back to L left, repeat. Very stiff and jerky. Several times in a row like record skipping. This polite, always something kind to say guy stops dead, looks me straight in the eye and says, "What the hell was that? What was it?" We both just started laughing. Matt, the usually pretty chill teacher, had to separate us for the rest of class BC. We couldn't even look at each other without laughing. Writing these out I realize they probably sound pretty lame, but at the time, I miss that guy. I should have found a way to hang out with him outside of class. Honorable mentions to Dumb and Dumber, which I saw when I was about 8, and the episode of the It Crowd called The Haunting of Bill Krause, which both made me cry with laughter. When I was about 13, my late uncle told me what is still my favorite joke of all time. I've retold it so many times and tweaked it to make it my own that I don't remember exactly how he told it, except the premise and the punchline, but I'll tell a basic version of it. A guy runs out of petrol at dusk in the middle of nowhere and finds himself walking into a strange motel hoping to get a cheap room. He walks up to the desk and is greeted with a friendly hello by the staff member. "Hello to you too. I'm hoping to get a room for the night. I've ran out of petrol and it's a fair hike to the nearest station." The staff member taps on his computer and suggests a room and a price. "No, that's too expensive. I have this much." He shows the man a handful of loose cash. The man frowns. "We do have a room in your price range, but it's not one we usually rent out. There's a rather specific rule about the room." "Fine, whatever, I'll take it." The man turns and takes a key off the wall behind him. "It's yours for the night. Just don't touch the pink bear." "The what?" "The pink bear. Just don't touch it and you'll be fine." Thinking that he's dealing with a crazy man, our hero nods politely and heads towards the rooms. He walks all the way to the end before he finds the right door, which he promptly opens. Inside is the most bare basic room he'd ever seen. A single bed, a toilet and a wash basin. Nothing out of the ordinary, except for one extremely strange thing. Up one corner of the room were thick metal bars forming a sort of cage, and in that cage was a small bear cub, covered in bright pink fur. It was facing away from him. He had the impulse to walk right up to it and touch it immediately, but didn't. Shrugging, he took off his boots and collapsed in the bed. After a short while, he woke in a cold sweat. He'd been dreaming a crazy dream and he looked across at the bear, which hadn't moved. He walked over the cage. He could easily reach his arm through the bars and touch the bear. He shook his head and went back to lie down. Again, after a short time he awoke in sheer panic. He jumped up and went over to the cage. The bear had not moved or made any indication that it even knew he was there. He reached his arm through and was just about to touch it when he pulled back. "No." He told himself, "I can't touch it. There's a rule for a reason." He laid back down and went back to sleep. After a slightly longer amount of time, he woke with a shriek, blind terror filling him. He rushed over and touched the pink bear, the impulse finally getting the better of him. The moment his finger touched its soft fur, things happened very quickly. It made a sort of ugh sound, as though disappointed, turned and began very quickly to grow to twice, thrice and then quadruple its original size. Wicked long claws grew from its fingers and gripped the bars, ripping them apart. The man promptly burst all over himself and turned and ran. He stomped down the hallway toward the front desk, the sound of the bear chasing him close behind. He got to the desk and the staff member looked confused. Before he could finish his sentence, the bear came flying towards them, smashing the desk and its occupant across the room where they landed in a pile of broken wood and flesh. He got out the door and into his car with the speed only someone truly running for their lives can do. Trapped in his car, he realized he had no keys and no fuel. He had basically made a sardine out of himself. The bear, sensing an end to its chase, stalked close to him, reaching down and peeling the roof of the car off. It reached down and poked him with one of its razor-sharp claws. "You're it." Does maniacal, slightly unhinged laughter count? I was trapped in an abusive, manipulative relationship for 4 years. One of the biggest sources of conflict was the late night calls. He wanted me to stay up and talk with him on the phone until 3 or 4 AM almost every night of the week. But he didn't actually want me to talk with him. He wanted me to sit completely quietly and listen while he droned on and on with anecdotes about his life and experiences. If I spoke, I would ruin his train of thought and start a bout of furious screaming from him. When he got angry, which was almost every day, he would scream into the phone so loudly I couldn't even understand what he was saying most of the time. If I fell asleep, that meant I didn't love and respect him enough to stay awake. Sorry, this is a wall of text, but it's relevant. Anyway, fast forward 3 years from our breakup, and I start dating the man who would become my husband. This is the first relationship I had after the abusive one that I took seriously. I really wanted this to be the one that worked out. So one night he and I were up late talking, probably 1 or 2 AM, and I fell asleep in the middle of the conversation. When I woke up to my alarm, my stomach dropped. I completely devolved into a panic attack and called him to apologize. My BF didn't answer because he was asleep, and I left this long, rambling, sobbing message of apology before I went to work. I spent the first hour of work just utterly devastated. We'd only been dating a week, and I just knew I had ruined it. Then he showed up to my work and asked if he could talk to me outside. I was shaking and felt like I was going to throw up, but I followed him out into the parking lot. But he only wanted to know what had upset me so much. The way I talked in the message had scared the shit out of him enough that he drove to my work on his day off just to talk to me in person. Not only was he not mad about me falling asleep on him, but he couldn't figure out what was so bad or wrong about me doing it in the first place. He laughed and the realization that I'd overreacted hit me, so I tried to laugh too. Then the laugh sort of took control of me, and I doubled over belly laughing until my chest hurt. I didn't know that stupid shit from TV shows and movies actually happened. Laughing and laughing until suddenly you were sobbing instead. I laughed until my throat was raw and tears were falling down my face, and then I cried for just as long. My poor, brand new boyfriend held me once he realized I was crying and sort of patted my head a lot and tried to be calming. I honestly don't know how that whole 24 hours of our dating experience didn't convince him to turn tail and run. He stuck around though, and we celebrate 5 years together this month, 3 years married this December. TLDR, I laughed until I couldn't breathe and then cried until I nearly threw up when I realized my current boyfriend wasn't an abusive manipulative bastard like my ex. Glad he eventually married this crazy woman, me. My mom is a psycho, so anything that screws her over is fodder for laughing to tears fits. She totally loses it. Example, one time she dragged us food shopping as kids, and she lost her footing going down a hill. The ugly old lady cart she was pushing fell too. Food went flying. Instead of checking for injuries, she yells, "My milk. Get the faking thing." It was a gallon, tumbling full speed down the street. My sis fetches it, and it's basically empty and the plastic bag is shredded. My mom yelled a bunch of expletives, her favorite way to communicate. Mom buys a cheap caller ID from some Asian country at the dollar store and can't fix it. The gadget kept giving her the date, and after like 6 times of trying to set it up she yells, "No kidding, it's April 27th, you motherless bastard." Mom gets caught out in the rain all the time. This time she remembers her umbrella. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The expensive umbrella she had broke, and she was drenched. Since she still has a moral conscience, she didn't just chuck it on the street, she carried it until she found a garbage can, her resentment growing. When she locates one, she beat it against the edges, cursing of course, and all these rich people, Upper Manhattan, were staring at her. One time she was excited to get new curtains. She gets on a kitchen chair to hang them, something she hates doing because she thinks it's too high, and she's wobbling around. The disaster isn't what you think it is. She didn't fall, but she couldn't get the rod back in place. After 20 minutes, and almost in tears of rage, she gives up. I casually suggest she get a new rod, because you can't help her and can't laugh. She agrees, gets off the chair and yells at the rod, "Now that you ruined my day, I'm going to ruin yours." She proceeded to beat it against the windowsill before throwing it away. The dent is still in the paint, 13 years later. When I was 14, my friends and I would always go to the house of us, the richest one of us, that had a whole basement apartment for himself, and watch movies, play video games, eat cheap food, etc. The usual, I guess. We were always with the 3 of us, but at a certain point, we bought a deep fryer. Things started to change dramatically. Some other boys from school heard of it and immediately, there were almost 10 people every day. This changed the dynamic in such a way that everyone got a bit more cocky, as if someone had to become the alpha male. The worst, or actually the best, night was when someone brought a blow-up killer whale with him, and every one of the 10 boys, except for the old gang of 3, started to act as if they were group faking the poor plastic soul. I think that my 14-year-old brain started to lay its foundation for the incoming giggles. After this horrific scene, we went to watch a movie, all covered in greasy fried snacks. We got the movie at the local rent house, my Netflix youngins. This Scandinavian movie started in a church and there was a weird ceremony and a guy sniffing coke in the bathroom. The guy comes out and all of a sudden, due to some sort of zombie outbreak, everybody has to stay inside. Of course, the zombies break in, and the whole movie revolves around the coke guy trying to escape the zombies. But these zombies were the worst zombies I've ever seen. One of them had an amputated leg, and I swear until my last day on earth, they just strapped a big bologna against his leg. After seeing that, I think the neighbors thought we were dying, because the 10 of us lost breath, whilst yelling and throwing that poor killer whale against the wall. Total madness. I think that was the first time I got high, because choking on my own laughter made hallucinate like crazy. The only thing I was seeing was zombie rabbits that were wearing the skins of other rabbits while I was maniacally laughing. Sometimes I wish I still knew the title of that movie, but to keep the dream of the moment alive, maybe it's better this way. I worked the breakfast and lunch shifts at a summer camp kitchen when I was 18. I'm not talking the kind of kitchen that reheats canned sloppy joes 5 meals a week. We made damn near everything from scratch, and most of the produce was local. Easily the best 3 months I've spent starting my day at 5:30 am. Half of the kitchen staff was Hispanic, and while most spoke some English, it was choppy at best. I spoke enough Spanish to hold conversations with them and translate when I could, but we generally relied on George, the one Colombian who was fluent in both. George's fiancée, Julie, also worked in the kitchen, and arguably had the hardest time with English out of all of them. She could speak and understand simple sentences well enough, but like the rest of us, she leaned on George to fill in the blanks. On the first day, we met up to go over kitchen safety rules, cleaning procedures, and all other sorts of commercial kitchen know-how. George is quietly whispering intermittent translations to Julie and the other staff. Before long, we reach the safety portion, where we are told to loudly say, sharp, hot, or corner. Whenever we are carrying something sharp, hot, or we are rounding a blind corner, George translates. Julie and the rest of the Hispanic staff nod in delayed assent, and we move on. The next day, Julie, George, and I are working the lunch shift. I was chopping through a mountain of cilantro when I hear Julie's voice from mere feet behind me, yelling, shark. Startled, I look behind me and see Julie, safely, carrying an 8-inch chef's knife, bellowing shark, loudly enough for the entire kitchen to hear, over and over again. I looked over at George and asked, did she just say shark? George smiled, nodded, and put a finger to his lips as if to say, yes, but don't tell her. 10-4. We managed to let this go for about a week. Every time Julie yelled shark, we'd lock eyes, alarm the office, and fight the oncoming laughter. One day, Julie yelled shark more times in 3 seconds than I thought was humanly possible. We couldn't keep it in anymore. George and I fell to our knees laughing. She looked at us, confused, and asked what was so funny. George, amidst his giggles, told her that she was saying the English word for tiburon. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. Her face blushed, and her hand made a quick detour to cover her mouth in embarrassment, before curling into a fist making swift contact with George's shoulder. It didn't matter. George kept laughing. I kept laughing. Before long, Julie was laughing. The best part of this story is that Julie didn't let this stop her. She kept saying shark instead of sharp for the entire summer, and before long the rest of the kitchen staff were saying it too. We were about 16 or 17 when a friend bragged that he didn't feel anything whenever he used mentholatum, aka DPEAT, a cream that relieves muscle pain but gives a strange icy burning sensation when applied to skin. We didn't believe him, so we dared him to apply some to his balls. Even better, the exact product we found for him to use wasn't actually DPEAT, but was a stronger variant used on horses. We pulled together about $20 all up to pay him if he went through with the dare. This dude, confident as anything, just straight on all ducks it in front of us, dips his fingers in the cream, and slathers it on his nuts. Stands there, cocky as anything for about a minute or two, loudly bragging about how he doesn't feel a thing and we're all buses, etc. before he suddenly went quiet. We all started to crack grins, and in the silence we heard him softly whisper "Oh no." His face started contorting, and almost right away I was on the damn floor laughing so hard I couldn't breathe. He started flailing and screeching and running around in a circle. The rest of us were complete wrecks, just crying and laughing and rolling on the floor. After a few seconds he remembered there was a pool in the backyard, so he ran outside, still naked from the waist down, and jumped in. We couldn't even follow him outside, we were in such a state. Apparently it didn't offer him much relief, and we still found him sitting in the pool minutes later when we finally made it outside. He had tears in his eyes. He did win $20 though, so after he got over the pain he was pretty happy. Usually I laugh at anything and everything, and one of the times I've laughed the hardest is when my two best friends and I were going to prepare dinner. So it was going to be my friend's, let's call him K, birthday at midnight, and around 10 PM all of us realized we wouldn't be able to go out, since this was around the time when finals are happening and we needed to do good, final year in college etc. So my other friend, let's call him C, and I decide to cook dinner for my friend and celebrate the birthday. Around 11:30 we all gather up and we check out some roasted chicken that we had going in the oven. Unknown to me, C had bought the nicest and softest French baguette that he intended to use to make the sandwich. I, being hungry and impatient, got out some good old wheat bread and decided to make my own sandwich. Therefore, while C was heating up the baguette in the oven after the chicken was done, I proceeded to cut out 2 thick slices of the chicken and got my sandwich all ready to go. At this point, C gets the baguette out and starts making the sandwiches for all 3 of us. So I tell him not to bother with mine, since I already got it ready. He looks at my plain bread with disgust and says, "Dude, you had to be premature, didn't you?" K falls down laughing at this. We don't quite get why he's cracking up so much about C admonishing me with my haste in making the sandwich. Between fits of laughter, K tells C and I how he thought C was saying I was born a couple of months premature and don't have a fully developed brain, which is why I couldn't wait for that baguette to be ready. When we hear this, we also burst out laughing. We are crying from laughter, and every time we try to take a bite of our sandwiches, one of us will burst out laughing, setting us all off, making it near impossible to finish that sandwich. All this time, another of our roommates is upstairs with his girl trying to have sex, and he can't concentrate because of our laughter. So he comes down to silence us, and seeing us on the verge of wetting our pants, starts laughing himself and intrigued, asks us why we were cracking up. We are too disoriented to tell the story, so while he's waiting his girlfriend storms out of the house because she can't stand us cackling like hyenas, which only makes us howl harder. The nonsense started around 11:50 and didn't end till 12:30 AM. Best birthday present we could ever give K. My partner and I had just finished moving and were too tired to make dinner, so we decided to get some fast food and call it a night. I had never been to the nearest fast food place before, so decided to look up the menu before going because I hate being that person sitting trying to decide in the drive-thru. After some looking around I decide I would like their fiery Angus burger. I make an immature joke about how it sounds like a fiery anus, we have a giggle, make a few more lame jokes about it, and then head out. I get to the drive-thru, and in my tired just moved haze I accidentally order a large fiery anus. The moment it comes out of my mouth I realize what I've said, and immediately start shouting Angus, Angus, and hear a snort from the person through the microphone and a breathless "please drive to the next window." At this point I'm mortified, but losing it simultaneously, and my partner is in the passenger seat dying. I'm literally crying and trying to breathe past the laughter, and we can hear laughter inside. The girl serving us was very professional, however as she was taking payment, which I used my card for, she had to walk away to compose herself. All the employees avoided any eye contact until we left, trying their best to keep their composure, which I commend them for. It can't have been easy, because we were sitting there literally tears streaming down our eyes. If someone didn't know it was laughter they would have called an ambulance, because we were red in the face and not breathing. We laughed for probably a good hour or so after we got home, and I'm sure we made every worker's night. I was up at my friend's cabin for the 4th of July with his family and some buddies, and we were boating over to a fireworks show on the lake. Once we got to a close spot, my friend's dad driving the boat says, "This looks good, why don't you drop the anchor and D?" My friend clearly had never done this before. It was his uncle's boat and his parents were also kind of new to boating. He looks back at us still hesitating and asks us, so I just drop this thing. Myself and our other 2 friends are in the boat like, dude, it's an anchor, just throw it overboard. There's a little sense of urgency too because we're starting to drift into other boats. Eventually my friend says, alright, here goes nothing, and emphatically yells anchors away, for some reason. He throws the thing overboard, and we all watch silently as the anchor line quickly unravels off the deck, until there's only a few feet left, and the final piece of rope slips out of the boat, and into the lake. Apparently it wasn't tied to the boat at all. I think it was the natural setup and delivery of this accident that made it so funny, because I've never laughed harder in my life. My friend's parents were visibly upset, and he was still confused how he managed to fuck that up, despite all his precautions. And my friends and I were on the floor of this pontoon laughing uncontrollably. We called him Anchors Away Andy for the rest of the summer. Also, we learned later we were in over a 100 foot of water, so the anchor wouldn't have hit bottom anyways.